Welcome to another Clever Dev video here. Today we are going to do a tutorial on the Material UI data grid, and I have not added any styling. I have a separate video that really dives deep into styling. Today we are going to focus on core features like sorting and filtering. You can see some of these things here, and dive in also to some of the challenges that I had getting customizing some of these core features. And also, I will include TypeScript on this video, and even there, I face some interesting issues. So, if you're interested, then stick around. All right, so for this video, I've got some basic setup done, but we are really going to code essentially all of this data grid together. So this will cover sort, filter, export, cell editing, and pagination, and TypeScript will be enabled, but truthfully, most of this is going to be JSX, or a lot of this is going to be JSX code, and TypeScript really only factors in when you have values like your consts, your lets, where you need to bring those values into your JSX. And so we'll have to type our columns, our addresses, and any styling that we do that's not directly in the JSX. So with that said, right now you can see that TypeScript saying, hey, we've got some problems, and that is absolutely fine. As we're starting with our data grid, right now my JSX is just a paper wrapper around a data grid, and I've started to code the columns just to save some time. Addresses will be our row value, and have not done anything with that other than I've set up faker data, but we still need to set up the TypeScript typing. So that's where we stand. I've also got the exports done just to save a little bit of time. But anyway, that's where we stand. So with that said, first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to get our data grid to render with some rows and column and get our column set up. So I recommend start with the columns because you need those column fields for your row data, for typing your row data. And so you can see the typical pattern is field, header name, and then in this case I'm using flex, or you could have just said width, but I'll set a field of address and header name. And this one I'm actually going to do a combo field of street and apartment address. And then I'll set a flex of 2 for this one, for this column. So that'll make that one twice as big as any of the other columns, and it'll also fill up whatever width is available. These columns altogether will fill up whatever width is available, whatever width we set for our data grid or for our wrapper. So no ugly white space. So anyway, we are going to come back to these columns again and again. If you want sorting or to disable sorting or filtering and so on, you actually often will do that at the column level. So let's go down to our addresses. Here I kind of encountered an interesting thing. Maybe it speaks more to, it's been a while since I've been deep into TypeScript and having to use it every day. But anyway, so what I expected is I'd be able to say const addresses and give it the type of grid row props, which is how that's the typing that we get from Material UI. Helps if I import it. So there we go, we have that. Oh, and we'll do the typing for our columns in a minute, but I want to show this. So grid row props. One challenge I ran into is that grid row props is actually, it's not showing it to me yet, but it's actually a read-only array. So when I tried to come down here and say address is push, then it said, hey, push does not exist on grid row props. Even though grid row props, it's an array, but since it's read-only, then it didn't like me loading the data like this. And so what I ended up doing is I ended up taking the grid row props and just ignoring it, not using it, and I typed addresses just by hand, you could say, or manually. So for now, I will comment that out, and I'll give our const addresses a more typical array, readable and writable array value. So here we go. We've got our array typing on there. And I'll just set it to an empty array. So TypeScript's a little slow to keep up. It is initialized now. Let's go back up to our columns. And we are going to give these grid call def. And that's just straight from TypeScript there. I mean, from Material UI. So this one worked fine. I didn't have any trouble with it. And I think, once again, it's because I'm populating the array as part of the initialization. So anyway, just a little hack here where I just ignored what TypeScript or what Material UI gave me and typed on my own. So with that said, let's go and add these to our data grid so that it will stop fussing at us. So we've got our rows, got our columns. And this is looking better down here. Let's see if there's anything. Yeah, it's a little unhappy that we aren't using all of these imports yet, but that's okay for now. And let's see. Okay. So this is looking better. It actually rendered. I could dig into the DOM here, but the reason, I'll just go ahead and tell you, the reason that we're not actually seeing that data yet is because data grid just really has to have a height on it. So I'm actually going to add that. I've got this const data grid sx. I'm actually going to add that to the paper wrapper. Probably should have a better name like paper wrapper sx. But anyway, let's get that on there. So now we've at least got a little bit of margin around it. If I didn't have my, by default, the width is 100%. If it was less than that, then this margin left and right would kick in. But I'll just leave it for now. And let's get a border radius just for kicks too, and then we'll add that height. So border radius of 2, and then I will add height just to show that it's working, and then I'll show you something that I bumped into that was really challenging for a little bit. So there we go. Now that we've got a fixed height on the wrapper for the data grid, now we're seeing our data. So the data grid, it's kind of an interesting component in that it's got a ton of internal calculation going on. And so in some ways, you don't want to go in and try to mess with the internal workings of it. They give, MUI gives tons of props for the data grid, so you can do all kinds of things, but you don't really want to do things you're not supposed to do, so to speak. Anyway, one thing that I accidentally stumbled on is I initially started with min height. And here we go. We're back at missing out on, well, it's kind of interesting. It looks like it's trying to have some kind of height, but my guess as to what's going on here is that it has to have a fixed, well, no, min height really should be giving us a fixed minimum. So I think this is kind of like a bug almost in data grid. Maybe it's a bug where I'm giving it min height, and either that's not passing through from the wrapper to the data grid properly. Maybe they are specifically looking for height, or just something about their internal mechanics. It really doesn't like this min height, so make sure that you don't do what I did, and instead you specify a height. So once again, I will leave that commented out there so that if you're using this code, you don't run into that same issue. I will also mention that I've got a link to all this code in the video notes. So take a look there. Before we keep going, I want to type this, and I'm kind of surprised that TypeScript's not fussing at us down here. But anyway, typing for the SX prop is easy if you know what you're looking for. It was a little hard to find in the docs. In fact, I don't think I was able to find it in the docs if I'm thinking about it. Now, I think I had to look at, finally someone left a nice comment on one of my posts and said, hey, if you're looking for that typing, here it is. So anyway, it's this SX prop from MUI material. So I'm going to go ahead and add that down here. That's all it takes. And TypeScript wasn't fussing at us before, but it definitely shouldn't be now. And anyway, let's go check, make sure everything's rendering properly. All right, here we are. Looks good. So before we've even gotten into sorting or filtering or exporting or anything else, I'm just going to show you, these are actually, a lot of these features are just default on here. Um, so quick sort there with that arrow. And then there's, of course, this drop down that's got even more things. We've got this great filter component that's already enabled. So pretty cool stuff here. However, we can customize a lot of this in our actual code. So that's what I'm going to dive into now. Very interesting thing, once again, with the data grid. I think it's by far the largest component in the Material UI component library. And by the way, I'm just using the free version. And you can see that from the fact that I'm importing MUI x data grid. The premium version has a different import and has more features, more props available, but probably for most people, the free version is going to be all that you need. Anyway, with that said, I'm going to dive in and start adding some of these. I'm going to start with sort, and a big important thing to keep in mind is a lot of the props are customizable either at the column level or at the data grid level. So I'm going to do sortable false here. So by default, columns are sortable. But now this one, the address column, will no longer be sortable. So you can see that those options are missing now, and we don't have that arrow. I don't remember off the top of my head what the kind of like kill sort at the data grid level is, but there's a prop for that. And in the article that I linked to that has all the code, I mentioned some of those props, but for this video, I'm not going to dive into them. So we've disabled sort just for that column. I'll show it still, working for the other column, so we see that arrow there. So let me kill that. I have quick clicks that steer me wrong sometimes. Anyway, what I want to look at now with sort is we can actually set an initial state. So I'm going to go down, and at the data grid level, we can set an initial state that's basically like a default sort is what I would call it. So you can do a number of things with this initial state prop at the data grid level. You can set a default sort, you can set a default filter. Those are the two that I dive into, and I'll show the default filter, and I have to admit I actually failed at getting it to work, but I don't know if that was me or if that was MUI. I suspect their free version of data grid may have a few bugs, and I'll also highlight some of the TypeScript issues. But anyway, so, and that min height issue that we see on my screen here versus height seems like a bug to me, but anyway, so I'm going to add that default sorting, and it's kind of a deep prop here. So as part of that, you give it a sort model, and you can then add whatever fields you want. Here we go, simple as that. If I refresh this, I should see a default sort of my state. So now you can see the arrows visible, a sort is applied, and we see a whole bunch of Alabamas. Also, I should mention that I've got 200 rows coming in, and I've just used faker.js for the fake data here. So I've also got a Material UI table tutorial, and I've got a very similar setup between this video and that one, if you've seen that one. I use faker.js, have a similar loop for just populating our addresses field. So anyway, good call out to mention that. The next thing I want to mention is I'm not going to dive into it, but if you wanted to give a custom sort, maybe you have like the docs, the MUI docs list date as an example of when you might want to do this. But you can do a sort comparator here and set some kind of algorithm, and that's I'd say that's all there is to it. It's pretty straightforward, but I'm not going to do that for this video. So next up, now that we've got our sorting, we need our filtering. This first column, I'm actually going to just use as my column where I'm turning all this stuff off. But I will turn off filterable then. It's true by default, but got that false there. So I mentioned that I should have been able to set an initial state with an initial filter. But I was not able to get that to work. So let's take a look at that. I'll just show you the code, and it'll throw an error, and I will then comment it out so that you have it in case I'm just doing something wrong. It's entirely possible. I have some speculation on why it might not have worked, but it's possible also that this is just not working properly in the free version, and maybe it is in the premium version. So it's kind of like sorting. We've got filter model, like sorting, sort model. And then it's actually supposed to be items in there. And then we have our array of, very similar to the sort, we have column field. And probably they should have just named that field, kept it consistent with the sort. But anyway, I'll do zip operator value equals and value. I'm going to do the zip code for the capital of Texas, 78701. So let's give that a minute here. Let it refresh. And here we go. So no filter operator found for column zip and operator value equals. So zip is populated with strings. Even though it's zip code, it looks numeric. It's actually coming back from Faker.js as string values. And so perhaps these filters just aren't working on string values. I don't know. Maybe if I did contains instead of equal, but I'll comment this out. And then go back here to the zip code, and I can do a filter on equals. So let me just pick, let's see, 50247. It looks like it's working there. And so you can see I've got all these different docs pulled up. And I just pulled from this example here. I mean, it looks pretty similar to what I did. So I don't know what's going on with that, but I will call it out as just something that I'm a little suspicious of. So could be me, could be Material UI. But let's move on to the next topic, which is the exporting. So like I mentioned, I will leave that commented out there. And exporting is, once again, on these columns individually, it's enabled, but you actually have to add a toolbar component to have access to the export button. So first, I'm going to add that component. So I'll actually set that above the initial state just because there's a lot of commented out stuff here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set components equals toolbar, and if I remember right, it's the default that has a number of components in it is grid toolbar. Yes, there we go. So that gives you export density, which is kind of a cool thing. Makes it changes the row height. In another video, I dug into manually changing the row height, and I had made it back when it was still MUI v4 was the most recent version. And basically, I'll just say you don't want to change that manually. You want to use this density option here. Filters, columns. This is pretty cool. You can hide columns. Anyway, all that's to say, I don't care about these first three. First, because filters is already at the this header level, so I don't want it in the toolbar. Column hiding is pretty cool, but for now, I'm just gonna have the export in there. So instead of components toolbar, grid toolbar, I'm actually going to manually choose what to have in here. So let's see, do a return here, and you'll need a grid toolbar container because that's what provides the spacing, or that's what provides the containing component, I should say. And then within that, I'm just going to have grid toolbar export, so we see it there. So now we've just got the export. And in a moment, I'll actually click that. Well, I'll just go ahead and click that, make sure it's working all right. So there we go, it downloaded. So pretty cool. One thing that I don't know why they didn't do this by default, but I think most people like to see these buttons over here. So a quick thing is simply to add SX here, and just a simple justify content, flex end. That should be all that we need. So we can see that that has bumped to the right there. That's good. And obviously we just saw it rendered fine, but here we go, failed to compile. Let's see why. It looks to me like it's trying to say, yeah, there it is, property SX does not exist on this. Well, obviously it does. It's obviously reading properly, and I suspect that either this is like a bug in their typing, maybe they just haven't updated the typing for this to MUI v5. Anyway, it's not really our jobs to fix the typing for a third-party library, so I'm just going to put a tsignore right there. So that was the only TypeScript issue where I had to do a tsignore on this thing, and it's being a little slow to pick it up. I know you can do it. Well, this tsignore was working a little bit ago. I'm just gonna, worst case, we can just do like a style on there if it's not gonna pick it up. I'm gonna move on. I think maybe it just needs to, it's just trying to figure itself out still. Nope. Anyway, that tsignore should work. It's been working for me, and probably if I just restarted my server, it'd be working. Anyway, let's actually just change that to style. Maybe that'll make it happier. I always have to remember the proper number of curly braces here. I think that's what it is, though. You can find that name. There we go. There we go. All right. Well, I would recommend trying the SX with tsignore. But I guess worst case, if that doesn't work properly, then just set it to style. But that's pretty frustrating, pretty obnoxious that it's doing that. Anyway, let's go back up here, and on my first column here, I'm going to set it to not be able to be exported. All right, so I just added the disabled export, and you actually have to set that one to true to keep it from exporting. So now what would happen is if I went to my export here, I'm not going to bother opening it up, but if I export another one, then it won't actually have this first column on it because we disabled export for that. So next topic is the cell editing. So I'm going to go in here. What you should be able to do is double click, and it should just bring you into an editable, it'll give you indication that you're able to edit it. Also, if I just started typing, that should give me indication that I'm able to edit, but obviously I'm not there. So what's going on? Well, let's actually add that on right here. We actually have to enable editing. And there we go. You can see that difference immediately. So all I got to do is set that value like so. And the docs have a lot of great stuff about validating the exports that you, or, excuse me, the editing that you do. I got a little ahead of myself. Export and editing. It has a whole lot of information about how you validate the editing that you do, and not going to get super deep into that right now. But one thing that really piqued my interest was that you can actually control what it looks like when you're editing. However, this was one of those things that, once again, I just was not able to get working as well as I hoped. So I'll show you what I attempted to do with the editing. So I'll do it. I'll do it down here on this one. Set it editable true, and then so what we should be able to do is set a render edit cell, and just give that an arrow function here. I'll just say val, and we should be able to just return whatever we want. Editing val.value. Let's see what that looks like when I attempt that. So you can see, good thing is that we've changed it so now it has that text in front of it. But one thing that I struggled with is that then I wasn't actually able to change the values. Now, what I could have done is really tried to dig deep into it. But when I looked at their example code sandbox, then it was a pretty extreme amount of code that needed to be implemented in order to customize what the editing looks like. And granted, their example was a little bit more complicated. So I've written over 100 MUI articles and done, I don't know, 15 or so videos. And really, if I can't figure out how to get something working in like 15 minutes, a prop like this working in 15 minutes, then probably they need a simpler system. That's my opinion there, but that seems to make sense to me that they should have a simpler way of implementing that prop to make it more accessible to people. I suspect that maybe pro users get more into the data grid or something like that, and so maybe they have some better examples or get some support from the MUI team because they're paying customers. I'm not sure. But anyway, what I will do is I will just leave this in here. And like I mentioned, all this code is being linked to, there's a link to all this code, and I've got the same comments in that article and that code. So I'll leave that render edit cell in. You can refer back to it if you want to attempt it. But anyway, that was just one of the more challenging ones. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and move on to, I think we still got to cover pagination. And so with pagination, that is just dealing with this component down here. So it's probably one of the lesser customizable features of the data grid, but that's quite reasonable considering it just does its thing, right? You say how many rows per page, look at the first page, second page, and so on. Anyway, one of the cool props related to it that caught my eye is actually there is a auto size feature in it. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So we've got this auto page size equals true. Simply setting that. Wait for it. Oh, whoops. It helps if I put this in the right spot. I had it inside the initial state on accident. I'm going to put it above just so that I don't make that mistake again. So there we go. Auto page size true. Yeah. All right, so now you can see we didn't have any pagination customized or set up or anything like that before, and it was just defaulting to having that rows per page drop down and so on. Here you can see that it's changed. I don't have that rows per page. What that prop, that auto page size is doing is it's saying, okay, how tall, what is the height of the data grid? How many rows can I comfortably fit on there? And it's only rendering that amount of rows with no scroll bar. So it's kind of a handy thing if you just don't like scroll bars. I actually have a separate video on customizing scroll bars with WebKit in Material UI, so you can check that out if you want. But anyway, this was a pretty cool thing, so I'm going to go ahead and disable that. And I'll just show you, if you wanted to customize the default, I'll show you how to do that. But first, before we move on from that, I actually want to show you another funny thing that comes with the typing with TypeScript. So we have this pagination prop. Look at the typing on it. The typing on it is true or undefined. So you can't actually turn pagination off on the data grid, or at least not if you're using TypeScript, because like if I try and say false, TypeScript gets unhappy with me eventually. Maybe my computer's slow. Yeah, there it goes. False is not assignable. So it's kind of funny to me, like, I'm not sure why they have the pagination prop if it's always true. But anyway, I will leave that on there. And the next thing we need to do, if we want to customize the default, that rows per page and so on, then the first thing we need to do is actually set a state const. So here we go, page size, set page size. Right, if you're changing page size, you need to control it somehow. So I'm going to set a default value of 20. You might have seen in the dropdown a moment ago, the minimum was 25. But in line with setting that to 20, then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set page size. Oops, there we go. So this is using our state const here, our state value. And you also need to set an on page size change. And this is pretty much straight from the docs here. Like, there's not a lot that you can get creative with here. So using that setter we just created. And then finally, gotta have your rows per page option. Not gotta, but if you're setting a minimum that's not 25 or 50, like if you're setting the starting value to a value that's different than what is by default in the dropdown, like I set the starting value to 20 instead of 25, then you probably want your rows per page to reflect that. All right. My squiggly red line has not kept up, but it looks like it compiled properly. So we're going to go and take a look at that. So here we go. You can see rows per page is 20. And with that, we don't have enough room, so we've got a scroll bar. And I drop this down, and now it's 20, 50, 100 instead of 25, 50, 100. So that's really the majority of what I wanted to show off. It seems like a lot of customization, a lot of code, but really, if I remove some of this stuff, our JSX just really isn't all that big, right? We've got our data grid and a few customizations on it. And a lot of it is really, a lot of the code is really these column definitions. So I think that I could do a video just on the columns. There's tons and tons and tons of props, tons of customization in them. But anyway, I hope that this tutorial is helpful with just getting you started with the data grid. Like I mentioned, I've got a couple of other videos, one that goes deep into the styling and also discusses render cell, and another that injects buttons and links into the data grid. So that you get a feel for how to do those things. So with that said, I hope that you have a great day.